Jawbreaker. It's a book by Gary Berntsen and Ralp Pezzullo. And it's a story that hasn't been told completely till now. And these are two gentlemen that have been so kind as to want to spend a little time with us on the cutting edge today. So we welcome to the cutting edge Ralp Pezzullo, Gary Berntsen, and the story of Jawbreaker. Yeah. How did you guys meet? How is it possible that you have a 23-year veteran of the CIA and you've got a guy that was a screenwriter by all prior knowledge, and how did you guys come together?
I was getting toward the end of my career, and I had thought about writing a book, but it was not going to be about this subject. It wasn't going to be Jawbreaker. I thought about writing about something entirely different. And as I thought about it, I went to a bookstore and bought the book, Getting Your Book Published for Dummies, actually. Read the book twice, and then realized I needed to work with someone else if I was going to write a book on my first time out, because I wanted to get it published, I wanted to be successful. And I began searching for someone to work with. And I eventually, after several months of looking online and reading about authors, I would find Ralp Pezzullo's name. I would find that he had written the book at the fall of Somoza with his father, who had been a U.S. ambassador and deputy assistant secretary of state. I bought the book, read it. I bought another book that he had written called Eve Missing, which was fabulous. Read that as well. And then based on that, I sent him an email and said, I'm an officer of the U.S. government. I would like to meet you at some point to talk about collaborating on a project. I've done a lot of counterterrorism work. I didn't say I was with the agency. And then he agreed to meet me for lunch in New York.
Well, this doesn't fit too much. I mean, you did your investigative reporting in depth and found somebody that was going to fit perfectly for what you wanted them to do. Well, let me ask this. Everyone would like to know that. From the day that you finally touched bases together, how long did it take you to write Jawbreaker? How long did it take?
We basically met for the first time in New York City, as Gary explained, and we sat down, we had a lunch for 5 or 6 hours, and Gary told me the story of another operation that he was involved in. And at the end of that, we agreed to collaborate. We shook hands. I walked him to the train station, and as he was, getting onto the train, he said, "Oh, if this works out, I have another story. I was in Afghanistan, and I led the Jawbreaker team, and I had Bin Laden trapped up in Tora Bora." And I said, "Wait a minute.
Hold that.
Wait a minute. Let's talk about that for a minute." And then it took me a while to convince him to change the order of the books, and the whole process has taken about a year and a half.
First thing that someone's going to ask us, and everybody wanted to know, is that you make reference in the book several times, Gary, to the fact that a gentleman by the name of Gary Schoen, I think it is.
Gary Schroen. Right.
Schroen was there first with Jawbreaker.
Right.
Okay, so that begs the question: when did Jawbreaker initially start? Before you got there, obviously, but when was it put in place in Afghanistan?
Well, you have to understand something. That Jawbreaker was the code name of what the counterterrorism center within CIA used for teams that went into Afghanistan. And I actually had been on a Jawbreaker team 15 months before Gary Schroen. I was on the ground in Afghanistan in 2000, with a 5-man team, and we were planning to try to kidnap or capture one of Bin Laden's key lieutenants as a way to figure out what they were planning against the US.
What date was this again?
This was in March of 2000.
March of 2000.
This is March of 2000. So I was on the ground there. We were all alone. There was no U.S. military. There was no combat search and rescue to come and get us. We were out there on the end of a very long
Okay, maybe
branch.
we should help. There's a bunch of viewers out there, okay, that aren't familiar about Jawbreaker, or actually, I mean, what amazed us greatly after we did our research was the fact that nobody knows actually what really happened in Afghanistan. It was like, oh yeah, that happened. And they don't have any concept, and that's why Jawbreaker is such a good story, and you did such a good job with it. But let's put it into some perspective here. In 1993, we had a terrorist bombing of the World Trade Center the first time.
Yes.
Correct.
And I think they just put the last guy finally away to in jail. Finally,
Right.
recently. That's 13 years later.
Yeah.
In 1996, it was Khobar Towers, we recall,
Yes.
and that was a housing development in Saudi Arabia. Our question was, after we read your book, by the way, which stimulated our brain cells, and we said, were there any agency people in Saudi Arabia there? Was it a targeted hit from the bad guys, or was what happened there?
Are you on about Khobar Towers?
Yes.
Well, Khobar Towers was the Iranian government working with Shias and working with others, what we called Hezbollah of the Hijaz, and in an effort to attack us. I mean, that was an act of war to which the United States never responded. And they killed 17 of our servicemen and injured almost 400 others in that bombing. And had not a couple of very alert security policemen on the roof of that building seen that tractor trailer pull up there and warned everyone of the potential for a bomb and started an evacuation, we would have lost many others.
96, that's 96. Then in 98, we had the Dar es Salaam bombing of one of our embassies, and also the Nairobi embassy. So those were consistently within a few daws of each other, weren't they?
It
Or
was within
Same
minutes.
day.
Within minutes. Within
Now,
minutes
I
of each other.
led the CIA's team to Tanzania for that and was involved in capturing the very first individuals and that told us that they were working for Osama bin Laden and it was Al Qaeda. I was dispatched because we believed, like the 96 bombing, which was Hezbollah and Iran, we thought, and like 1992 and 1994 in Argentina, which were bombings by Hezbollah with the support of Iran, that this was again another Hezbollah sort of Iranian bombing. And then of course we'd get out there and we'd capture them and it would turn out they were Sunnis and that bin Laden had gone big.
Okay, now because this, we have to get these proper in perspective. That's 98. Then we believe that the administration at the time, the Clinton administration, used infinite wisdom or infinite, what was the name of that operation?
Infinite reach.
Yeah.
Infinite reach
Yes, yeah.
to drop some cruise missiles on the Osama bin Laden camps out in the desert.
Right.
And then they hit some aspirin factory or baby bottle factory that was where?
Sudan.
In the Sudan.
In the Sudan.
Khartoum.
Yeah.
Right. Now, our question to you was, of course, we couldn't ask the people at the time or even now, but we can certainly ask you, what kind of intelligence was that? I mean, that
Well, they would have only attacked those facilities with knowledge that they had been used before, that they had grid coordinates, that, it wasn't, as some people said, a pig and a poke. They took a decent shot at facilities they'd known had been used. Unfortunately, our enemies at that time, bin Laden and a lot of the terrorists on the ground in Afghanistan, didn't respect the fact that we would fire missiles at them. They only respected the fact when you come at them and when you fight them face to face.
Okay, now we're jumping over here because you got so much stuff that you know about this, and just great. Then the coal situation happened, and we lost a Navy ship and a lot of good sailors on there in Yemen, and so it's starting to become a little bothersome, this Osama bin Laden person and his group of terrorists.
Absolutely.
And so at that point in time, we had that bombing go on.
Correct.
And what was our responses as a country then? And that
Well, there was no immediate response by the Clinton administration. They wanted to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, almost like in a court of law, that it was Al Qaeda. It was pretty clear to most of us in the intel community. And there was no response. And then, of course, the Clinton administration leaves, the Bush administration comes in, and they don't react to it either.
Hey, Rob, I
Okay.
want to jump in. I've got a question for you. It's something you said earlier, Gary, and thank you for saying this today. In July of 2000, a certain congressman told the U.S. Congressional Committee that he gave bin Laden's exact location in Bahrain, yet it fell on deaf ears. He called it the biggest intelligence failure in the history of this country. You indicated you were over there right around that same time. He indicated, from what we've read, that the CIA dragged their feet by a couple weeks. What I think I heard you say earlier, that's not necessarily the case.
Oh, no, it's not the case. The CIA was entering, there were multiple teams. I think the Jawbreaker team that I went on in 2000 was Jawbreaker 5. There had been 4 other teams in there working with the Northern Alliance to collect intelligence. But you have to remember something. We did a lot of work strategically, CIA did, to identify bin Laden, to say where he was, and there were multiple opportunities to either kill him or capture him. But the Clinton administration would not do it. They would not pull the trigger. So there's a lot of people in America, of course, that say it's CIA's fault. The point is CIA did not have the tactical information on 11 September. to stop that attack. But strategically, it identified bin Laden as a threat and had given the administration multiple opportunities to capture or kill him, which were not taken by the administration.
Okay, listen, we've got so much to cover. I got to jump in here on this because we got to identify the players.
Right.
Okay, we got some players here. Kofor Black. Okay, Kofor Black you mentioned in your book without a pseudonym. In other words, he
correct.
was someone you could identify and say, this is a guy I report to.
Correct.
Michael Schur.
Scheuer, yeah.
Yeah. Sure, who we see on TV all the time on Fox News or on CNN or whatever, responding to the fact that we didn't care whether Osama bin Laden was around at the time, and he's kind of, I don't know, I call him squishy, to be honest. I don't know him. He's a good man?
Very bright fellow.
All right.
Make no mistake.
Very intellectual.
Well, you have to understand something, first off. Kofor Black, outstanding man, field operative, had served, had come up through the ranks in CIA, and is really the man that provides the really powerful leadership in CIA, in the Counterterrorism Center, and especially after 11 September. We should all be grateful to what he did. I am grateful to him. Mike Scheuer served as both an analyst and in the operations segment of CIA. He is the man that understood before almost anyone else that bin Laden was a threat. He convinced CIA to establish the resources for us to collect against bin Laden. Had it not been for Scheuer, we would not have known everything about bin Laden that we did when we conducted the war, or Al-Qaeda, and we wouldn't have had the success. Scheuer understood early on the terrible danger about bin Laden, and he was like a man on the deck of the Titanic screaming, iceberg, 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 and the response was, take that man down below, he's bothering the passengers.
Is this a Richard Clark moment as well? Did Richard Clark stand up the way that Mike Scheuer did?
Well, I think that Clark was a very competent man at the National Security Council, and my dealings were always, anytime I dealt with Clark, it was in a what we called a video conference, where Kofor Black would be there, I would be there, other people would be there, and Clark would be managing the responses where it was CIA, FBI, they would all meet in these teleconferences when there were problems. And I liked Clark. I thought Clark was very, very bright. I thought he was dynamic, and he was very forward-leaning.
Did he report to the president or the National Security Advisor?
National Security Advisor.
All right. The issues that we get confused about, and this is where your book comes out. And I mean, it just knocked us right off our heels after we started the beginning of the book, read it to the end. No one in this country, you finally did it. You finally exposed something to the people of this country, and we were, as I said, again, shocked. About 110 CIA operatives, 350 Special Forces, Delta Force people, and a few mop-up guys from the 101st Airborne, 500 or something less, I don't know how many it was, but at any rate, they took a country of 30 million people. Your group was able, with that many people, to take a country of 30 million people and change the regime. Through technology. We learned about,
Well, technology was part of it. The bigger part of it was leadership.
Understood, and the thing that struck us so hard was the fact that from the beginning, when you met with Tommy Franks, General Tommy Franks, they had a plan to do this, and they had the support of these Northern Alliance people.
Yes.
That's the question everybody wants to know. How did we get the support of the Northern Alliance people to make this regime change?
Well, we had been in contact with them for some years. We'd been doing liaison with them. And the previous Jawbreaker teams that had flown in there, we were working with Massoud. And so they wanted...
Massoud is the guy that got...
Ahmed Shah Massoud was
he
the
was
leader.
the guy. He was the great leader
Right,
that was
of the
assassinated.
Taliban. Correct.
All right.
Correct. And we knew them. We'd had contact with them. They wanted a closer relationship with us, but neither the Clinton administration nor the Bush administration early on was willing to make that commitment. And in the book Jawbreaker, we talk about the fact that we get pulled out on that Jawbreaker 5 mission when we're trying to do a really serious operation to capture a senior Al-Qaeda lieutenant, when it was ridiculous to pull us out because Washington was afraid.
We're going to throw a few words at you here because in the book you mentioned General Tommy Franks. He met with you and with some of the Northern Alliance warlords, and he said, here's what we're doing. We're taking Mojar Sharif or whatever that was. Then we're going to take Tahlequah or that pasture valley or whatever it is, and then we're going to take the Somali
Plains.
Somali plain, and that was the plan. And there was some conflict that you had to go through to make sure that that all happened. It did all happen, as a matter of fact. And then we wind up watching TV. I'm going to skip lots of part of your book because I want people to read your book. It's quite entertaining and very knowledgeable. But at any rate, we wind up at a place called Kuala Jangi. Kalajangi. Okay, excuse my, because we don't speak that particular language. And I'm not going to be going over there, I don't think, as a special agent soon. At any rate, the bottom line is that if that fortress we see on television is where a guy named John Walker Lynn shows up, one of your agents, Mike Spann, shows up on the radar, and bad things happen. And I guess it was a General Dostrom fellow that the Taliban, they just sort of laid down their arms and said, we're going with you, we don't want to fight anymore. They took him to this fortress as a prison. It was undermanned, and then and this is the question that we have for you. How well did you know Mike Spann?
I had never met Mr. Spann. I had identified all the other teams and was involved in assembling those. But Spann had departed prior to my return to headquarters after the attacks. He went out very early with the team leader for
so he was assigned to somebody else?
No. Yeah, he was assigned. He was on another team. He wasn't on my team. Jawbreaker was the big team that handled all of Eastern Afghanistan.
Okay.
There were smaller teams, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and he was on a smaller team. And in the book, I talk about the fact that I first heard his voice during a battle that was in Mazar Sharif. He was giving radio commentary on it.
Right.
But I never met him. He was a very brave young man, and he was on his first assignment with the agency.
Yeah, go
Let
ahead.
me jump in. And the question is, how difficult it was for you to deal with the major Shiite and Sunni warlords?
The Shiite
How well
warlords,
organized?
well, the Shiite warlords were the Hazaras, and the Hazaras were not difficult to deal with at all. They wanted to deal with us. You're talking about Dr. Karim Khalili, and there were a few other minor warlords, but the Hazaras have been treated horribly by the Pashtuns, by the Pathans, and the Pathans were conducting a genocide against them. They welcomed the Americans. And the Shiites of Afghanistan are a little different. They're very progressive. They had women involved in politics. They believed in educating their women. I mean, they were pretty good people.
What was your opinion of the Northern Alliance troops?
It was a mixed bag.
Okay.
Some of them were better than others. There were a lot of reservists.
Now, I do have a concern. I think our policy is we do not negotiate with terrorists. Yet you had 8 missionaries released, and I believe in the book you mentioned the fact that you were able to make that happen.
Right.
Put up $4 million. I don't know whether that was paid or not.
No, it was never paid.
It was
But we
never
were
paid.
not negotiating. I was stealing them.
Okay,
I
just
was
a clarification.
stealing them. What I did was, this was not with the knowledge of the full Taliban government. We contacted secretly a member of a minister, and we're going to pay him off and then help sneak him out of the country when it was over.
Job well
But this
done.
was and actually we got him for $100,000, which I thought was a bargain.
That was a good bargain. The issue we had, though, on this, back to this fortress debacle that happened, or that was a bad thing. It was a bad thing that happened. I mean, in the space of time, of course it wasn't giant, but it was a bad thing to lose an agent. And I guess the question that we had was, did the actions, there were 2 reports. We're on the cutting edge, so we use 2 reports. In your book, you mentioned that Mike Spann was just overwhelmed. There's a guy by the name of Alex Perry for Time Magazine who wrote a terrific article that I'm sure you both read, seriously, which mentioned that Mike Spann actually asked a question of one of the detainees, and then turned around and the guy said something not nice, and as a result, Mike Spann shot him twice, and then he was overrun by. That was a report, he said. So that's not true?
No.
Let's debunk that now.
They
Then
never did that.
that was not true.
No, of course not.
By any imagination, not true. Okay. The other thing was that we thought was interesting is that when the agent that was trying to rescue Mike Spann
One
during that,
survived.
right? We got different names. One was from Alex Perry's. I think his name was Dave, and in yours, I don't remember what his name was, but
Awesome.
At any rate, they gave different names for this particular hero, and that's who I call him.
Yeah.
And he says, well, he couldn't. They had a tank around the corner. They were trying to shoot at everybody, and they couldn't get any airstrikes in because they couldn't highlight the tank. So finally, they got a special dispensation so that they could finally get rid of the tank.
That was a problem, though. You can even mention
Yeah,
it early
well-
on.
Well, this is when they went into the war, there were certain rules of engagement which were later came up in Tora Bora, and the rules of engagement that the Air Force was operating under were that they could only attack a target that had been pre-designated, or a target that could be lit up by a SOFLAM, which is a laser designator. And so anything else, something that somebody just said they saw on the ground, was not covered in the rules of engagement, which this was later changed in Tora Bora, but was a problem at the prison uprising.
Right.
Let me jump in for a minute, Ron, before we go to Tora Bora. Can you explain why Taliban and Al-Qaeda prisoners were sent to Guantanamo?
I think that at that point, it was quite frankly, I thought it was a good choice. There was really no place to hold them in Afghanistan. I think that we didn't want to turn them over to foreign governments until we had a full opportunity to debrief every one of them, because we knew there were follow-on plans for attacks.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that we were doing there. The mission of Jawbreaker was, because the Taliban wouldn't give up, bin Laden was destroy the Taliban, destroy as many of Al-Qaeda as you can, and destroy their leadership as well. Rescue the hostages, and fourth, find out what the next major attack is going to be.
Yeah.
We had just suffered a catastrophic attack in the United States. We were concerned that they could have done other things that would just be as equally horrific.
Yeah.
We needed to have control of those people immediately for strategic intelligence. And if we'd given them out and sent them to all these different places, they'd have been executed immediately by those governments, and we'd have never known. And out of that, we were able to learn, and it wasn't the Americans, it was the British that get the credit for it, about the intelligence of the planned follow-on attacks in Singapore, which were going to be 21 tons of explosives against the American, British, Australian, and Israeli embassies. So,
Is that dealing with David Pearl,
no,
or is that a different?
completely different
Okay.
thing. But that was the intelligence that was developed there,
Yeah.
saved the follow-on attack,
that-
and
That's why Mike Spann and Dawson were at Kalijangi for this specific purpose.
taking that risk.
They were going around, there were a lot of Arab fighters in Kalijangi, and they were going around specifically addressing them and saying, do you want to talk? Do you want to cooperate? It was not an interrogation. They were basically just seeing if there was anybody there who was willing to talk to them.
Our question, of course, is we're being, I hate to sound patriotic here,
Yeah.
but, when we found that John Walker Lind was in that group of
Yeah.
detainees there, we don't understand why he was able to walk out of there alive. I don't know what kind of control that our soldiers or our guys had to not dispense with him quickly.
Tremendous control, yeah.
We all understand we all have human rights training. We understand that he was violating the law and he would be prosecuted at that point. And if, had he been actively firing on people when he was captured, he'd have been shot. But he wasn't. He was a prisoner, so he was treated as a prisoner. And as soon as they learned he was a U.S. citizen, he was transported back and had a trial in the United States.
Reading that report in your book, I think, should be must reading for every child in our country, for every person in our country. The reason why I say that is because we understand we have a tough time understanding what fanaticism is,
Yes.
Right.
and until you realize that these people and that report that you so aptly put together is well worth the entire book to read, because it shows the fanaticism and that there's no quitting these people. You're not going to talk them out of it. You're not going to give them food stamps and send them on their way. These people are going to try to kill us for whatever purpose, for however how long, and ad infinitum. So we have to set our minds on a different mindset for solutions.
Absolutely.
It was like the United Nations of murderers there. They had passports and nationalities from around the world, and they came there to conduct jihad against America. And that's what they said when we spoke to them. We came here to kill Americans.
Okay, let's add some housekeeping process here to this, because it's really important. here you are. You get sent over there on this Jawbreaker mission. Obviously, 9/11's already happened. We want some corrective action. Now you got a Republican or George Bush is in the White House. He's giving you the green light to go ahead and let's go do something. Let's fix this. You got this guy named Mullah Muhammad Omar, who's in charge of the Taliban.
Right.
Did you ever talk to him?
No, never spoke to him, and I don't think any American ever spoke to him. Even prior to that, Congressman Bill Richardson, he's later Ambassador Richardson to the UN,
Right.
did trips into Afghanistan when we were having some discussions, when the U.S. government had some discussions with the Taliban during the Clinton administration. I don't believe he ever met with him. He met with people in the Taliban government. Mullah Omar was sort of a reclusive figure. And
So who was the spokesman for the Taliban then?
well,
that they
one of
talked
them
to?
is studying at Yale right now. In case you didn't
That's
know
the
that.
one that
One
is
of
being
them,
reported?
one of the two primary spokesmen is a student at Yale, and somehow got
Brutal.
a visa into the United States and is studying there, which is incredible given the fact that he represented a brutal regime that violated human rights, conducted genocide, and yet he's in America.
All right. Now the other thing here's where everybody gets a little bit confused too. We're being picked on right now. Our government is being picked on because there's a lot of opium dealing and drug dealing going on in Afghanistan, and everybody says, "Well, gee whiz, why aren't you stopping that and giving them, wheat and corn and soybeans to build instead?" And what we questioned was, this was going on quite well during the Taliban regime and during the Al Qaeda challenge. What part of is there any connection at all with the building of opium and the terrorism campaigns and the Taliban? Was there any connection?
Well, opium growing and trading has been going on in Afghanistan for hundreds and hundreds of years, and warlords on all sides for hundreds of years have made money off of the opium trade, and that's going to continue. And it's a problem, for the United States, and something that I'm sure we're concerned about. But people have to understand that when we go into these countries, we cannot, just by being there, change their history, the way they make a living. You can't just wave a magic wand and expect 200 years or 300 years of problems to just disappear.
I was going to say, right now we have coalition forces there, probably 1,500 coalition forces in the whole country?
Yeah.
Of 30 million?
Yeah.
30 million?
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, we asked the question immediately as soon as we said, here you guys went in to a country of 30 million people, regime change, In-N-Out Burger have lost 280 Americans in 5 years. Why aren't we doing that in Iraq? Why is it different?
Iraq is very different because Iraq was a country that had a very large mechanized army, a lot of armor, and a much larger army, much better organized, and we needed larger forces to destroy them. The problem in Iraq was that after the initial invasion, which was executed brilliantly, there weren't enough troops to maintain law and order.
Okay,
And the thing got away from us.
General Eaton just wrote something in the Army Times recently about the fact that he feels the same way, that General Shinseki was right. You needed overwhelming force to be there. Mm-hmm. I have a problem with that because of only one reason. I mean, you've got the Kurds in the north, right, mm-hmm. who are basically autonomous. If left to their own devices, you wouldn't need any coalition forces there. Mm-hmm. They could run their own stuff. The people in Basra in the south part of Iraq have very little bad things going on. The English have pretty darn good control of that with a small force. Mm-hmm. It's only this wonderful Sunni triangle that we're talking about that we need overwhelming force in.
But that's still half the population.
Yeah.
Half the population of Iraq lives in those 4 provinces.
And so so you're saying that we don't need 130,000, we need 250,000 troops there?
Yes. If you looked at the statistics from the Balkans and the relationships of troops to populations, I think Ambassador Dobbins, who was fabulous there, has done some studies at the RAND Corporation, and he was calling for the larger numbers as well. Jim Dobbins is a great guy to talk to. He's brilliant. He was America's firefighter diplomatically for a number of years, and he was calling for and in studies afterwards, he has stated the larger numbers were.
We didn't realize, until we read your book, we did not realize to the depth of the Predator use in Afghanistan. That here's a remote controlled aircraft with no pilot
Right.
carrying
Well, there's a pilot, but someplace else.
yeah,
from a distance.
he's playing it on a video game somewhere in,
They're real pilots
in St.
flying
Louis.
those
Yeah, I'm sure. There's probably
It's our kids.
he's in some secret location in St. Louis,
Right.
and he's flying this thing by wire and with a Hellfire missile underneath. And he sees some bad guys building an IED under there, and like today it happened, he was dusted. Those three guys were dusted with a Predator. Why don't we put more of those into the field, into the places we need them?
Well, I think we have a lot of platforms like that. There's Global Hawk. There's other things
Yeah, yeah.
that the military has. But Iraq is a huge country. Afghanistan. These are gigantic areas, and there's a lot of people that are struggling in those zones. People don't understand. There's 6.5 billion people on this planet fighting for resources, a limited amount of resources. There's a lot of conflict. There are probably 20 civil wars going on the planet at this moment. There's a lot going on. And when you think about the size of the U.S. military or the size of the intelligence community and the responsibilities that we have for coverage, it's astounding. The performance that we do achieve and all the lives we have saved. There's a lot of complaining about, the intelligence community missed this, they missed this, they missed this. There's 100 successes for every intelligence failure.
Let's talk about saving some people, because I just got to bring this one out. Yeah, what kind of a thrill can it be to call a Blue 82 code and watch the results of what you've just done? Now, for the people at home, they don't know what a Blue 82 is.
The 15,000-pound device that gets pushed out the back of a 130 that is unbelievable.
That's a C-130 aircraft. They push it out of the back,
And it's
and
about the
when
size
it
of a
goes off,
Volkswagen,
yeah,
and it has a kind of a long stick for a nose cone so that it doesn't dig into the ground. It sends out the blast in 360 degrees. Awesome.
so like in a 300-yard circle, it's just dust.
Matt,
Nothing.
more than that.
More than that. Okay,
That's huge.
and then you've got the J-dams, which everybody kind of is more familiar with. It's got the pointy thing. It goes into a cement brick wall or whatever, goes through it and then blows up later, right? And you got a variety of those 2,000-pound, 500-pounders, and whatever it is, and you're calling these things in, and when and Larry said this very carefully. He says, I was just concerned about the friendly fire possibilities and that. How many?
Every war,
you mentioned
there are so many, and you're right. This is probably in World War II there were thousands and thousands and thousands of friendly fires that were incidents that were never reported. Now, everything is covered in such great detail. It's very difficult. The modern battle place is a terrible place to be.
You mentioned
all sorts of things can go wrong.
Yeah, you mentioned one situation where we lost 5 or 3 or 5. I can't remember which number that was.
In the
But were
South.
there others? Were there
As far as I-
Were there others?
Yeah.
And after I departed country, there were others.
Gary, let me jump in, ask you about Haji Zaman. What are your thoughts about Haji?
Well,
Tell us
as
who he
you-
is.
As
for the
you
people.
know,
Tell us who he is and tell us what
As
happened.
as you know, there have been a number of people that have been redacted from the my book, and some of the names of the warlords that were down in Nangarhar province,
Okay.
and so we had some very, very serious problems with some of the warlords, and he was right at the top of the list. So there's a book that's been written by James Rison called State of War, and in that book he claims that the warlord Hazar Ali was cooperating with bin Laden and working with bin Laden. Totally inaccurate. That's a totally inaccurate
Did he call for a
statement.
ceasefire though, and let's 200
Zaman
get
did.
out?
Yeah, Zaman called for a couple of ceasefires, or tried to, and then of course I got on the phone and broke that ceasefire and continued the battle by calling in additional airstrikes. Because my view is that individuals that fly airliners into skyscrapers don't negotiate. So we were not there to negotiate. My orders were to destroy as many of the Al-Qaeda fighters as I could and eliminate its leadership. And that's what we were doing. We were not there to negotiate.
Now, how frustrating was it for you as an American, many years in service of their country, to have to deal with one warlord or another that comes up against another, a Taliban or an Al-Qaeda, and they say, you know, we're just tired. We're going to go have some food with them. We're going to talk with them. We're going to meet with them. We're going to have a little wine, and we'll discuss whether we want to fight them or not.
My deputy, who was forward with those guys as that was occurring, had the patience of Job. But he held it together. He's a great American. He's a former Marine Corps infantry officer. And it was very difficult doing all this. But we've dealt with people in that part of the world for many years. I'd studied Persian. I'd worked in the Middle East for many years. I understood how things worked. And we did the best with the resources that we had. And we got a lot of resources. Look, this was not just 100 American CIA people and 350 special forces. This was all air power that the U.S. government applied. The American people provided us the support. U.S. industry provided the finest weapons in the world to do these jobs. This was a U.S. effort. I was just fortunate enough to be out front doing my part.
You know, Gary, in your book, you list 6 factors that enhance your success. Can you elaborate for our viewers? You touched on some of them earlier.
I thought that, of course, I'd say leadership, and the guys I point to are Cofer Black, and now I can say his name, Hank Crumpton, who is now the U.S. ambassador for counterterrorism in the State Department.
Okay.
Cofer provided great leadership. Hank was the technician. Hank was the man that essentially made this new plan for modern warfare work. He's brilliant. And I'm thrilled that the Bush administration has him as their ambassador for counterterrorism. He is fabulous.
Let's
For all those that serve in the CIA, I guess I got to quote one of my heroes, Ronald Reagan. We could accomplish anything as long as we don't concern ourselves with who gets the credit.
Right. Hank
You
didn't try to
guys have
take any
done
credit.
fantastic work, and you're never going to get acknowledged for it.
Fine.
So we're here to say thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. It's a privilege.
One of the things that had that also follows up on that is that in the report we were reading some congressional record about what you just were talking about earlier about Senator Richardson Governor Richardson now,
Oh, that's right, Governor.
or then Secretary Richardson, going and talking to the Taliban along with Mr. Enderderf or someone like that. I don't remember the
Enderderf,
name.
probably, yeah.
One of those. Anyway, and he said, well, you know, you wanted to go disarm all of the Northern Alliance people. And then you got them the Taliban to say, yes, we're going to disarm everyone. We're after the Soviets left. And so anyway, they got them to disarm, and the next thing that happened was the next day the Pakistanis sent the Taliban all of the arms that they could ever use in a lifetime, and let the other Northern Alliance people out to dry after they had disarmed.
It was the issues of Afghanistan after the Soviet withdrawal is one of a terrible, terrible internal civil war where these guys tear each other to shreds and destroy their own population. The Taliban was accepted, was welcomed by the people initially because they were looking for peace. They were looking for order. They were looking to be able to walk down the street, put their kids in school or do something. It turned out that the Taliban was horrific in the end, but they were looking for anything.
But
So at
initially
that
they
point,
were welcome.
I don't think you can blame anyone sort of in the Clinton administration or Governor Richardson or anybody like that at that point, because there was just complete chaos on there, and they were trying to find some way to stabilize the situation. And I like Governor Richardson. I'm a Republican, by the way, but I like him. I think he's a good man.
Well, but you know, you're really. It was until you guys went there and put some finality to this process that we have anything. I mean, now that Hamid Karzai has taken over, which in your book you mentioned him several times and mentioned he was a pretty good guy.
Very good.
Yeah, very
But
skilled.
you know, he puts his life at risk every day that he goes out and steps out onto the podium. And you know, the whole issue of Afghanistan and the stability of Afghanistan. Now, it must be like a small child to you that you were able to, once you've participated in that process, and now to see the baby, you know, kind of growing up. What do you think of where the situation sits now in Afghanistan?
Well, I think the Bush administration deserves credit because they brought NATO in there. They're making this an issue where the world is helping. I mean, we're still going to be the biggest supporters probably economically, and USAID, the Agency for International Development, doing things. But the Bush administration's handled that all well. As Ralph was saying, this is a complicated, difficult, incredibly poor country. And it is going to continue to be so probably for a couple of decades, even though we do work. But America is a force for good in the world. We did great things there. Women can get an education now. Girls can go to school. They don't have the fear of torture and terror. And the country's moving forward. So,
Well, let's get.
I also think that we saw this in El Salvador too. I think countries get to a point, they've been fighting one another where they become exhausted. And I think Afghanistan is a case in point
I agree.
where these warlords have been fighting each other for decades, and finally got to a point where, hey guys, let's sit down and start to cooperate. This isn't working. My kids are getting killed, your kids are getting killed, and I think we're lucky in that they were able to agree on a leader in Karzai who was a forward-looking man, intelligent man, and somebody who was able to find unity and
Where there is
very
none,
skillfully
yeah.
Bring these guys together.
you got to give
that was an
Ambassador
issue.
Dobbins.
Yeah.
That
You
was
got to give Dobbins a lot of credit.
But that was an issue I thought you might bring some light to. Out of I don't know how many warlords there are in Afghanistan. 20. I don't know how many
Well, there's
there are.
major ones and then there's sub-warlords.
Exactly, and I'm so exactly. So sub commander or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is though that how many of those can get along at one time? Do you have any
Well, there's a
insight
lot of
to that?
there's a lot of history
Yeah.
between some of them. Bad history. Most of
Right.
it's bad history. And Karzai came in without that bad history. Karzai was a man that came in with no blood on his hands. And I was at a speech not too long ago where someone made the statement that an American friend of mine said, "Well, I'm as much of an Afghan as Karzai is. He went to school in India. He was outside." And I said, "That's exactly why he can run the country, because he hasn't done terrible things to other people." And they saw him as a figure that they could all cooperate with and build around.
Well, the Northern Alliance was with Uzbeks and Tajiks and those type of people,
Right,
and
Hazaras.
those seem to be similar brothers in arms, are they?
No, they had fought. Look,
They fought each other,
the
too.
Tajiks had done terrible things to the Hazaras.
Yeah, now they're over to the west, though, the Hazaris, right?
Yes, they are, but they did terrible things to
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
And so,
But did they get along with the Uzbeks?
well, they've had problems too. They've all had problems.
It's a family
With the
affair,
Pashtuns.
huh?
This is a tough thing to put together.
Let me break in here. Gary, for the past couple of years on the Cutting Edge website, if you haven't seen it, there's a question. Where and when is Osama going to get caught?
And
In your
Muammar.
book, you have an opinion. We've seen several articles indicating that he died in December of '01.
We're going to bring this up. I think when we
Well,
researched
I wish he would have died in December of '01 when I threw that blue 82 at him.
That's why
Yeah.
they sent you home. It was mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we must
was
have
injured. He
we
was
must have
injured
seen
in the shoulder.
in this research for the discussion today. We must have seen 10 reports from various sources saying that Osama bin Laden is gone. He's dust. He's dust. He's not going to come back. He's over. And the same thing. But no one has an answer for where's Mullah Omar.
Yeah.
And where is Osama bin Laden? And what's the other guy's name that we brought up?
Well,
we know where
let me
Al-Zuri is.
say- let me-
Al-Zuri is in Iraq.
Well, that's.
I'll give
That's
you a
a rumor.
small player.
Yeah.
Harun Fazil.
Let me go back just for 1 second.
Okay.
You're talking about bin Laden first off, and the major targets of Al Qaeda. Pakistan is a country of 160 million people. Most people don't realize there's that many people there. There's 25 million Pathans that live along that border. He did a lot of work for them, developmental work and all sorts of things when he was there in the 80s. So he has a lot of support.
He's got
there.
cover.
Yeah.
The only thing worse than not killing bin Laden would be to lose Musharraf, because then the U.S. would not have the ability to conduct operations and work within Pakistan's major cities alongside with
Right.
Pakistanis to stop some of these other threats that emanate. Pakistan is a place where there are a lot of people that don't like us, and Musharraf is incredibly important. He does a lot for us under very, very dangerous circumstances. And Pakistan could be a big problem if we were to lose him. And they've got nuclear weapons.
Our heart just went out to you, though. We're watching this, almost in color, the way you wrote it, Ralph. I mean, it was really nice. And about this thing in Tora Bora, and you're sitting there saying, okay, here's bin Laden. He's got 200 people. He's got all of his Saudis in Yemen, close buddies, tied in his group, and he's got maybe 600-700 others of the Chechens and all these other people, foreign fighters out there, and they all just pick up the phone and call the people on the Pakistani side of the border and say, we're coming, okay, here, bring the mules and everything, we're leaving, and then they call the other guys where you guys are dropped those Blue 82s and the JDAMs and everything else, and they're saying, well they got away.
Well, the Pakistanis put about.
They had
I was told
4,000
they-
what was
I told
it,
they were gonna bring
4,000?
4,000 up, but the fact
But when
of the
we
matter is-
heard it, the reports on television, they're going, well, they're going to stop and have tea and coffee and,
The television
talk about it.
wasn't correct about what was occurring there. But to say this though, 130 of them were captured crossing. You know, when there were two groups that came out, 130, and then Bin Laden had a bit more than that, maybe.
Right.
You know, and the group of 130 gets captured. They're the first people that get sent to Guantanamo. So there was an effort to capture people there. You got to remember, gigantic area, really inhospitable,
Sure.
difficult. And then when the tribes on the Pakistani side that were cooperating with Bin Laden were able to lead him to safety. So the point is that it was a very, very difficult thing, and that's why I
But
was
didn't you have
calling
global
for-
hawks and,
This
and
is-
predators going
well,
over that area?
yeah, let me say this, that you can have coverage, but you don't get coverage 24 hours a day. You have to realize something, that Afghanistan is a country deep inside. To fly things there, you got to bring them either from, you know, the Arabian Sea, you know, or you got to bring them from the Indian Ocean, or you got to bring them from
Missouri.
Missouri or Kuwait or wherever. This was not something like, it wasn't like Iraq where you could park aircraft carriers right there. But even on Iraq, you can't keep stuff up flying all the time over Baghdad. 24
After
hours a day.
23 years in the agency, I got to ask you this though. Was this the most exciting thing you ever did?
It was very exciting. I've been in a lot of places where a lot of interesting things were occurred. It was, for me, it was something I've been waiting for my whole career because of the training, the languages, the experience, and everything. So it was probably one of the more important things.
When you first went to work for the agency or for the company or whatever they call it, it was with Bill Casey. Bill Casey was during the Reagan administration, and it was there. And one of the things that we would like to know, if you can release that information, is are there management styles as they go along through the, you know, I mean, there's been, I don't know how many since the Reagan days.
Directors?
Yeah, the directors change almost every 2 years.
Well, Tenet lasted about 6. He's the longest serving director, I believe.
Right.
It changes a lot under new leaders. There's huge changes in the agency. But more important than that is who's selected as the director of operations. And there have been some huge errors in the last 30 years. And I'll tell you who made a big one. Bill Casey. Bill Casey hired a man that had never been in CIA. He'd been a businessman that didn't know anything about intelligence. So both political parties, Republicans and Democrats, are guilty of negligence in dealing with the agency at different times.
Right.
We need individuals, not who have just a minimum amount of time in the field. We need people that had dedicated their lives and careers abroad to continue to lead. We haven't always gotten that. We've gotten politicians. We've gotten people who've made their careers in Washington and the bureaucracy, and this has been damaging leadership-wise.
It's a two-sided coin right now. On one side of the coin, you've got Republicans saying one thing and the Democrats saying another, and it all comes down to this factor about there are not enough physical assets. And I've heard that so many times, I just want to stick my finger down my throat because it just upsets me. Either we don't have enough assets and we hire them and get them on board, or we have enough assets. So I got to ask you the question.
Okay. When you talk about assets, what we're talking about is case officers.
Correct.
Human collectors.
Correct.
If you hire a human collector, it will take you about 7 years to get that person through training, through language school, and through 2 assignments, which we would then call that officer a full service officer. That's if they make it. Many of them don't make it because it's very difficult, very demanding. Then what happens is we've had several times in the last 30 years, we've had huge drawdowns. In the mid-1990s, the Clinton administration drew down the DO by 25%. That's damaging. When you think about it, it was just terribly damaging. And so when you think about that, we can bring on a lot of people right now, young officers. We can bring on hundreds, which we are, large numbers. It's going to be a decade before they're ready to step forward and really be in a position to make a major contribution. Lots of young people, yes, but you need experience. This is about wisdom. This is about judgment. And I didn't get it overnight, that's for sure.
Hey, Gary, let me jump in. I'm thinking of Dale Watson for the minute, but with Homeland Security also, where different agencies had turf battles, where do you draw the line between the CIA and the FBI, and what was your relationship with him
Dale Watson's a great
in the
man.
bombings?
Who is Dale Watson?
Dale Watson left the FBI as the assistant director of the FBI for counterterrorism. And he was a man that had had a normal FBI career that came over to CIA and worked as the deputy chief of CTC. And when we started swapping deputies, He understood us, CIA, after a couple of years there. And when I was out on an assignment, and I did a number of significant counterterrorism operations in the mid-90s, Dale was the deputy chief at CTC. He was a great guy. He goes back down to the FBI and really brings with him a sense of what he learned in the intel community and starts to move the Bureau in a really good direction. I had great relations with the FBI. There are people there I respect, but you have to remember something. The FBI was organized to fight crime after the fact, and it was very difficult for them. Those FBI officers that served at CIA, a lot of them would come over and work with us, and I had a great one in one of my units, were as good or better than the CIA people there when they had the authorities under the agency when they were working abroad with us. It was working in the States, the constraints under the law, the difficulties of that made it very difficult for the Bureau.
I say that because I'm thinking of it, I guess it was from India, Prime Minister Gandhi was coming to New Orleans, I think, for some medical assistance. Whether or not that is a particular issue you were involved with or not, but again, I'm just curious because it would have been something stateside which might have been under the FBI's control rather than CIA, even though it's international.
Well, domestically, yeah. Domestically, it's
All right,
the FBI.
you're
They
saying
handle
to
stuff in
us,
the United States.
sorry, are you saying to us that we need more assets, that we could use more officers,
They're
case
in
officers?
growth.
And-
Porter Goss got it.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
understands it.
Okay.
Tenet understood it too and started the growth after we were gutted in the mid-90s.
Okay.
When Tenet became director, he started a path of growth, and it has continued to expand as we've gone on from the years.
But the question that always gets begged is it enough? Will it be enough in time? Are we safe
never
in the
be enough.
meantime?
It will never be enough.
Yeah.
It will never be enough.
I mean, this is a complicated world with so many different
Okay.
cultures and languages that you need to.
There's an oddball off the shoot issue here which comes into play that Americans want to know about. They're all afraid. I would call them the paranoid troopers, and they're out there. Can't say they're not. They're all worried about that black helicopter flying over their house, which may or may not be true sometimes.
Right.
As Woody Allen says, it's not paranoia, it's being perceptive. but anyway, having said that, I guess the question is, what about this Patriot Act? Does that have any influence at all on what the CIA is doing today or what intelligence and gathering is
Patriot Act
doing?
helps the FBI in the United States for internal coverage. And I think that it's reasonable to assume that we need better internal coverage in the United States because Al-Qaeda is a type of organization that morphs. It's going to make adjustments. They're not going to use a bunch of Saudis on Saudi passports to come in here on the next attack. They'll use individuals with American passports. The president understands that. The White House gets it on that. And he was attempting to ramp up his collection efforts on that. I would say, the only thing I would say to the president is I support the president in this administration, but they've got to reach across better to Democrats. They've got to say, look, this is what we're doing. They probably should have briefed them a little bit more fully on that. And it should have gotten more buy-in. But I do believe we need enhanced coverage in the United States. I'm not in favor of any kind of police state here, but we need coverage because there's going to be additional attacks.
Everybody forgets that we've had the Bali bombing. We had the bombing in Spain, Madrid bombing, and then we had
London.
and then the London bombing.
Yeah.
And these aren't. I mean, people forget quickly. Yesterday's news is yesterday's news.
Yes.
That's the reason why your book is so valuable, because it starts to bring into consideration these things that we did and we were able to do. And I just don't think that our country's gotten enough, pats on the back for what you were able to do in Afghanistan. But we're going to be facing lots more of these issues as the days and the weeks ahead, because the Al-Qaeda is not going away. What if you were to catch bin Laden and Omar and Zawahiri and Al-Farsi and all these other guys, if you catch them all one day, would there be another group that would be replacing them the next day?
Sure. This is a threat that's going to go on for the next couple of decades, and Americans need to realize.
So there's no
that
magic bullet.
There's no magic bullet, and it could, new groups could be developing today that we don't know about.
Exactly.
And as Gary said, these groups are going to learn the lessons from the people before them. They read the internet, they read our newspapers, they know what we're guarding against, and they're going to be clever. So we need to stay a step ahead of them, and also the American people need to understand that the threat is real, And with technology being what it is today, it just takes a few people, one or two people with the right technology to do, horrible, horrible things.
Well, why did you retire? We need you. Why did you retire, Gary?
I'm going to, I spent 23 years in the agency. I spent 4 years in the military. That's 27 years. I wanted to do some things different. And then in a few years from now, I plan to return to government. I may get involved in politics at some point. And
So you might
so
run
there's
for
other things.
something.
Gary, let me ask you one last question. Earlier we spoke about Mike Spann. We lost another hero in your agency, and that's William Buckley.
Right.
And I think from what we gathered, there's less than 90 agents that have died in line of duty at the CIA. What's your thoughts about William Buckley? You met him, I believe.
When I began as an agency officer, I went into the Middle East, into the Near East and South Asia division, and as soon as I entered the embassy, the bombs went off and destroyed the embassy in Beirut. Buckley would be called upon to deploy out there and become the chief of station out there. So, when I was just a trainee, he was in the office right next to me, and I would bring cables in him, and he'd help me with them. And then while I was in training, I was at headquarters one time, and they asked me, go out to the airport, Buckley's coming back. And I went out and picked him up at the airport. It was his last time back in the United States. Took the diplomatic pouch from him, drove back to the agency with it, dropped him off at home. And then he would return to Beirut. He would be kidnapped and tortured and would die in captivity, by Hezbollah. Buckley was a very brave guy that served in many, many dangerous parts of the world during his career.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like a lot of other people that was willing to go back to the tough places again and again and again. I mean, he lived his life, to the sound of the guns. He would ride to the sound of the guns. That was Bill Buckley. And there were a lot of other guys, men and women, that were doing that and still do that today. So it was, for me, it was a lesson I learned early on when he died, to stay focused and not let my guard down, to constantly be vigilant, and that I understood the dangers. Coming right away as a trainee, I understood how dangerous this was going to be.
We got to wrap this up, but one of the things that I want to bring into the play here is something that wasn't really broached. I mean, you could feel it in the book when you were leaving. I think you mentioned some guy named Rich that came to fill in for you at the end. But what does it feel like when you put your heart and soul into this issue or that particular thing, and then to just kind of get that kind of backward slap on the back? Okay, that was great. Move on.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the reward you get.
That's the business. But for
So-
me, it was the great privilege of my career to serve there in that capacity. I would have liked a bit more time. I thought I could have done more. They made a decision in Washington, and once they make that decision, they tell you you're done, you're done. There's no whining, there's no complaining, it's over.
No
It's
court of last resort, huh?
and so at that point, and the officer that came in behind me was a good man. He had a lot of experience, an experienced fellow. They decided that they were going to not have the multiple teams. They're going to go to a traditional arrangement in the country, and with a station. And he was going to be the chief, and he would take the place I was in. And so I had to accept that, and look around me and think about what I had tried to do, and hope that I provided the appropriate leadership to the men that were with me.
Well, I guess the question is, you're a young man. What you got a lot of days ahead of you, And I got to bring up something because I'm an Army guy. Okay, so I have to bring this up. But it was interesting to me to know that you were an Air Force man for 4 years, and then I read with great glee, mind you, when it said that you went into the Marine Corps
The PLC
for a short
program.
period of time for officer training.
Right.
Went through Marine Corps officer training.
Right.
And then the CIA picked you up.
Right.
And I thought that was just really fun because I guess you weren't as happy with the Air Force as I thought.
No, I thought the Air Force was fabulous. It gave me a great opportunity. And when I went to the Air Force, this is interesting. Here I am. I'm an enlisted guy. I'm going to college. I got 2 years of college at night. I go to the Air Force and say, I'd like to be an officer. And they said to me, well, you're not an engineer. We don't want you. I said, okay. And then I went and found a Marine Corps office, and I said, well, I'm studying political science. I said, we'll take you. And then, of course, I went to training. I was an honor grad when I went through the training and was very happy with it. And I was planning on a career as an officer in the Marines. I never thought the agency was a possibility. I met this recruiter who gave me the pitch, asked me to take the test. I never thought they were going to offer me a job. I never knew anyone in the agency. It didn't seem something that was realistic to me. And then, of course, when they made me the offer, I had to say to myself, okay, I got the commission in the Marine Corps, but there's this CIA thing, and should I do this? And then I made the decision because I thought in the agency I could have greater impact.
Well, so I guess we'll circle this wagon just like we started, and that was with you and Ralph talking about meeting up and about doing some books. New books in the future?
Yeah, we just signed a contract with Crown, a publisher of Jawbreaker, to do another book about an operation that Gary was involved in, involving the Japanese Red Army and the capture of one of their top leaders in Nepal.
Wow.
So
Now, what about the movie? Are we going to see the movie?
That's one of the reasons Gary's out here. We're meeting with producers, and there's definite interest in that. So we're hoping to find a producer, make a deal, and keep the movie as close to the book as possible.
What about being the expert witness on CNN or Fox News?
Well,
or
they've
something?
had me on television a bunch, and I've gone because I put the book up, and they're good people.
Right.
I like the people at Fox. They're great people. They've had
Good.
me on a lot.
You got some last questions?
No, I think we're just about done. I want to thank you for spending the time with us on The Cutting Edge today. It's been very revealing, and it's a great book, and I encourage people to go out and read it.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, gentlemen.